Okay, I can see we have quite a large group today. So I would like to start by saying, first of all, welcome to our webinar on social learning. And this is the first webinar in a three-part series focused on creating more conducive and purposeful work environments. And the webinar is jointly hosted by Thrive Worldwide and RavelWorks Africa. So my name is Faye. I'm the Managing Director for RavelWorks Africa and the convener of the Learning and Development Africa LinkedIn group, through which many of you have heard about this webinar as well. So first of all, I would like to say thank you to everyone who has sent in their questions and answers via the webinar poll. And the poll will continue to be live for the duration of the webinar. So you can still participate by going to www.pigeonhole.at and then entering the passcode get social. So, and it's coming up on your slide right now. Once again, www.pigeonhole.at and the passcode is get social. So we will endeavor to answer the most common and trending questions that are being posted. But in addition to this, you can also make comments and ask questions via the chat function in this webinar. Now, for those of you who still have your microphones on, can I kindly ask you to mute your microphones so that we don't have any interference during the duration of this webinar, and we'll also try to mute all of you on the back end from our side. So we are delighted to really see that we have quite a diverse audience in this webinar from different sectors. Including research institutions and universities, agricultural organizations, financial institutions, government departments, profit and not-for-profit entities. And equally, we have a very global audience with people participating from Ghana, Tanzania, the UK, Kenya, Nigeria, and many different countries on top of that. So let's get started. In this webinar, we will touch on the following areas. So we'll have a look at, first of all, what is social learning? What is it all about? And why social learning? We can see that the term has been trending now over the past couple of years. So why is social learning becoming popular? We'll look at a couple of practical applications of social learning as well. And then we have our guest, Verku, joining us from Nigeria, and he will walk us through a case study on how they have practically actually applied social learning. And lastly, we'll finish off by looking at the benefits of social learnings and some tools and resources for all of you. So the webinar will be 40 minutes long, and we'll leave about 5 minutes at the end to address some of the questions that we've either received ahead of the webinar via the poll or during the course of the webinar in the chat function. Now, we of course will endeavor to keep time, but just in case we go over by 2-3 minutes, we hope you will bear with us on that. So, what is social learning? Why don't we start with that question? Now, some of you may have had time to read through the short article that we sent out ahead of the webinar that was written by a lady called Jane Hart. And it was entitled Social Learning, What Actually Is It? And the article offered a few different definitions. But for those of you who have not yet seen the article or who would still like to hear a bit more, we'll begin by spending just a few minutes on the concept of social learning. Now, social learning theory is most frequently associated with somebody called Albert Bandura. The concept started to emerge in the 1960s, though there were other influences, of course, before that. Now, social learning theory proposes that we learn by imitating and observing others. We learn continuously, and we learn through asking questions and sharing resources. Now, there are, of course, some conditions to this. So observation does not automatically lead to learning, and nor does learning automatically lead to behavior change. And many of you in this audience who are working in learning and development, OD, and human resources will be very familiar with this. So Bandura defined a few factors that play a role in determining whether social learning is effective. And he defined 4 different factors. So the first element that he says is, well, it's about attention. Now, of course, it seems like a rather obvious one, but in order for us to be able to learn, we need to be paying attention. And anything that distracts us is going to have a negative impact on our learning. And naturally, we are more likely to learn and to pay attention when things are interesting or have a degree of novelty for them. The second element, or the second factor that he defined, is the issue of retention. And when we're talking about retention here, we're really referring to the ability to be able to both store and retrieve information. And this is an important component in the learning process. So one is paying attention, but the second one is then, can we retrieve and store the information that we have observed or seen? The third factor that he refers to is the factor of reproduction. And what that means is, once we have paid attention and been able to retain certain information, we now need to be actually able to implement and perform what we have observed. So this naturally requires continuous practice and opportunities for application. And lastly is the factor of motivation. And when we're talking about motivation, what that refers to is we need to be motivated to imitate the behavior that we've observed. And frequently what you might come across is elements of reward and punishment that play quite an important part at this stage. Now, in a work environment context, social learning is often expanded to include the many informal ways in which learning takes place in an organization. So that can be through conversations and exchanges with peers and colleagues, the famous water cooler conversations or pre-post meeting discussions, organizational FAQs, discussion forums, or searchable organizational content. Now, as much as social learning has very much become a buzzword in the last couple of years, it is in fact by no means new. In fact, social learning, when we look at it, can be viewed as humankind's oldest form of learning. It is how we have always learned as human beings. But it is a form of learning that remains largely untapped in the formal work environment. If you think about it, all of us will apply social learning in our day-to-day lives. So say, for example, you wanted to learn how to prepare a new recipe, or how to fix a flat tire on your car, or maybe how to install a new program on your device. Well, where would you go to find that information? How would you approach this new learning? The likelihood is that you wouldn't wait a few weeks to enroll into a cooking class, or to register for a course in auto mechanics, or to become a fully fledged software engineer. You are more likely to use a search engine or watch a YouTube video. Look something up in a discussion forum, or ask a friend, or observe somebody else carrying out the given task. And going a bit deeper is really why this focus on social learning. Why have we seen social learning start to emerge and become more and more popular over the last couple of years? And first of all, this is something which probably most of you will recognize, is we live in a changing world of work. Where increasingly we need to be able to balance people, planet, and profit. You know, our workforce is looking for meaning and purpose in their work, not just a paycheck. And many of you will have noticed that the so-called, in quotes, war for talent is real. And it's being felt across all sectors and industry, whether private sector, not-for-profit, agriculture, universities, financial institutions, you name it. So if we want to keep our talent and our top performers, then we must offer them something different. Major disruptions such as technology, the automation of work, and changes in job requirements, the whole debate about how do we balance a multi-generational workforce, and what do we do about questions around work-life challenges. Those are some of the things that are occurring all around us in our work environments. and there's generally to date a lot of tension, anxiety, and uncertainty amongst the workforce. And lastly, if we know that social learning is the main way that people learn anyway, so why not start using it? And with all of these things going on around us and impacting our world of work, there is an urgent need, and some people even say a seriously urgent need, to create positive, conducive, and really meaningful work environments that enable our staff and our people to collaborate, engage, and thrive. Now, I've mentioned technology before, and of course, as much as technology is here to stay and has in many ways really enabled us to organize our work in more efficient and effective ways, technology will of course not replace all human functions and skills. And there's quite a number of skills, such as emotional intelligence, such as collaboration, communication, elements around logical reasoning, relationship building and negotiation. All those are skills which really require people and human intervention. They cannot be replaced by machines or by technology. And they are here to stay, and they're becoming increasingly more valuable in the workforce. So if as organizations we really want to stay ahead and we want to remain relevant and purposeful, we need to harness the power of continuous learning and collaboration in these very changing times. So let's explore a little bit more about how social learning can be used in creating work environments that enable our staff to collaborate, engage, and thrive. And to start off with, oftentimes people understand social learning as it's about learning in groups. And that's not what we mean when we're talking about social learning. So it's not about learning in groups or learning in teams, but it's about learning through examples from others. Being able to quickly find something or being able to observe a given behavior. Now, one of the most widely used tools in social learning in the workplace is video. And that's perhaps not surprising. Oftentimes when people hear video, they think, oh, it needs to be a high quality production, or we're talking about high costs that are involved, or lengthy explainer videos, which in the end, nobody ends up watching. And that's not what video in social learning is about. So when we apply video to the work environment, it's much more about just-in-time content, or content produced by staff for staff. And videos that allow for what we call inside video search, meaning that staff can search for a specific word being said in a video and be taken straight to that section in the video. So let's say we have a staff who wanted to find out something on monitoring and evaluation. All they would need to do is type in the words monitoring and evaluation into the search engine, and they would be taken straight to the section of the video where monitoring and evaluation is mentioned. So without having to watch the full video. An important thing for us to note is that when we're thinking about using video in our organizations or in our context, the emphasis really needs to be on content and not on production quality. So it's not about producing high-level videos, it's really about making sure that staff and people have the information that they need when they need it. In addition to this, we need to make sure that we remove any obstacles for content producers. And here, I mean content producers as in staff. So if in your organization, your staff need to go through a lengthy validation and approval process before they can load a video on the intranet or circulate it to colleagues, then that's obviously going to be an obstacle and disincentive for people to engage in this kind of behavior. And in fact, it goes against the very core of social learning. Instead, what we have found is that oftentimes a basic policy in place or put in place by your organization is enough for most employees to be able to make good judgment calls and smart decisions about what kind of information to post and to upload. Now, at the end of the webinar, we will provide you with a couple of links that you can explore if you're interested to find out more about different platforms and tech solutions that you can use to incorporate learning into your video into your learning ecosystem. But for the moment, let me share with you a few practical examples of how video is being used as a tool for social learning. A very popular one is around employee introductions. Now, you have new staff joining an organization, and many of you have organizations which are quite large, or where your teams are located in different geographical areas, or even across multiple countries. So this can be an easy way for a new employee to be able to introduce themselves to a wider audience, and vice versa, for a new employee to connect and see who is who in the organization. Who is the director of finance, or who is the head of research? Who is my peer in Sierra Leone or in Togo, as an example? A second way that we're seeing video being used in social learning is more around demonstration and navigation. So here what I'm referring to is demonstrations for specific job tasks or functions. So how do you complete a monthly report? Or how do you upload certain research data? But can also be used to help your employees navigate simple and more complex workplace procedures in terms of how to submit leave requests or how to book a meeting space. And lastly, in terms of explaining new products that you might be launching, services that you have recently implemented, if there's any process changes that your organization is going through, or you might have, for those of you working in the nonprofit industry, new projects being funded by donors or new locations, and you just want to have a short video that explains to your staff the core components of the new projects. Another example is to scale expert knowledge. Now, many of you will have experts across your organizations and across your teams, but it might not be feasible for you to have those experts in every office or every area of operation. So rather than waiting for that annual or quarterly meeting where your experts travel to different locations and meet with the staff, or your staff travel to meet the experts, we are seeing video being used as a simple and quick solutions to be able to scale that knowledge across the organization and across the stakeholders. I'm just going to stop for a moment here. I can see a few people still. I see a few people still with their microphones unmuted, so please do us a favor and just mute your microphones so that we can all follow. I was talking about scaling expert knowledge, and from there I'll move to a common one where I'm sure I will hear a silent sigh in the audience, and that is with regards to meetings, and more specifically previewing and reviewing meetings. So as much as many of us might have too many meetings in our daily calendar, but let's face it, meetings are here to stay. And they form an important part of an organizational culture because it's where decisions are being made or where information is being shared. So what is becoming increasingly common is recording of meetings. And that's particularly useful in an organization where you have staff across different time zones, so that people can watch the meeting in their own time. They don't need to wake up at 1 o'clock in the morning or go to bed at 10 p.m. so that they can follow your meeting. At the same time, more and more workplaces are also starting to have a meeting preview. And what that means is presenters pre-record their presentation before a given meeting and make sure that all participants have access to this content, so that during the actual meeting, you can really save time. And you can spend the time on some of the core questions or making clarifications or decision making, rather than spending the time in the meeting on, overview and the kind of basic components of a presentation. And lastly, on video, one of the pieces that we see it being used for, it's a key avenue as well for your executives and management to communicate and to connect with your employees across the board. Particularly if your aim is to help staff feel engaged and know how their job connects with the bigger picture in these changing times that we're in, and place meaning and purpose at the forefront. So, for example, in times of change or transition, or when you are developing a new strategy, or you're moving in a new organizational direction, then a short video from management sent out to all staff with key points can really help to start engagement and generate a sense of transparency and a feeling of connectivity. Staff want to know what's going on in my organization, what's happening. And oftentimes you can communicate that better through short video than through a lengthy email or through a please find attached. But I want to highlight here that videos by managers to staff don't need to be only around big ticket items such as strategy. It can also be used to communicate regular updates, for example, weekly highlights or achievements of the week or achievements of the month and priorities. So what we're seeing is that video is certainly a very useful tool in bridging that common gap, which many organizations experience, the gap between the frontline staff and higher up managers. And it can be used to help build trust and understanding across the workforce. Now, while video can be seen as your corporate or organizational YouTube channel, it's of course not the only thing that you can use to foster an environment of social learning. So if you think about it, how do most of us find information in our personal and professional lives? Well, most of the times we Google things. We might be part of certain Facebook or WhatsApp groups. We might be members in LinkedIn or other forums. So we might have professional networks that we are members of, where we can ask questions to certain experts or gain insight from peers. So why not harness that type of learning at organizational level, since it's the thing that we're doing already anyways, automatically? So through things such as organizational FAQ apps, where your managers can come together and exchange challenges, or where your researchers can convene and talk about best practices or issues that they've had. Searchable organizational wikis, or in other ways of saying it, a Wikipedia for your organization, where your staff can go in, type in something, and the answer comes up immediately. And they get the information that they're looking for just in time. Channels and chats. All of us are part of WhatsApp, or the majority, let me put it this way. We spend a lot of time chatting with our friends and families and engaging, but we don't really use this in an organizational setting. And yet in our organizations, we have staff and people with questions, and we have experts or mentors with the answers. So why not connect the two? And lastly, I'll make a point on something which is becoming, I say in quotes, increasingly popular and trending, which is the issue of gamification. Very often associated with type of rewards or leadership boards, where people can see how many points they have earned or how their team is progressing on a certain issue in comparison to other teams. However, I put a caveat here, because gamification is quite difficult to pull off, and many initiatives, they fail because they are simply replacing one type of extrinsic reward, money, with another type, such as badges or status. And the success of any gamification will be heavily dependent also on your organizational culture. I want to also point out that social learning initiatives don't drive themselves automatically. They usually require a kind of steward role, at least at the beginning, to take somebody who takes feedback on board, right? Somebody who sends out reminders, keeps exchanges and debates lively and relevant. Now, in the case study on Nigeria that we'll be presenting shortly, you'll hear a lot more about that. But equally important, it's to take some time really to think and reflect before about what we want our social learning platform or channel to actually do. How do we want our audience to interact with it? Now, it might mean that you won't be able to track, measure, and monitor everything. And I know for many HR and L&D practitioners, that's very scary. So we will really need to ask ourselves honestly, what is important for us as an organization? Is it to monitor and measure, or is it that learning and collaboration is actually taking place in the first instance? At this point, I would like to invite Tever to take us through his experience and a practical case study from Nigeria. Now, first of all, Tever, thank you very, very much for joining us today. And we look forward to hearing about your experience. Welcome, Tever. Hang on a second. I think we're seeing a couple of challenges. Technology, as always. But as Teve sets up and unmutes his microphone on his end.
Yep.
Teve, you're there?
Yeah.
Perfect. Welcome, Teve. Take us through a case study Nigeria.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. And I'm excited to be talking about this. Thanks, Faye. I think that was really great. Taking us through the basics of social learning. And I'll just share what we did in Nigeria in one organization. So as many of you might know, Nigeria is experiencing an insurgency in the northeast area. And this is basically impacting a lot on the health, nutrition needs of the people, the populations around there. And around 2016 to 2017, 2 years back or so, there were, huge famine issues, and there needed to be a response with this organization working, on the for the people in that area. This organization needed to increase its scale in terms of capacity to deliver their projects and programs. They had to also, hire more staff and really get them, hit the ground, running immediately. And there also was the challenge of reaching, hard to reach areas in remote locations. So due to the context, security challenges, distance, and all that, conducting traditional face-to-face trainings or onboarding, was just not feasible, and it wasn't an option. As a humanitarian organization as well, this organization needed to cut costs and then do it in such a way, provide this kind of support for staff in such a way that donors, will be satisfied and not have any problem in terms of spending so much on such an endeavor. So the solution that was identified was to answer a key number of questions. So how do we provide relevant training for large number of staff working in different locations, in this case, Northeast Nigeria, in remote and hard to reach areas. The other one was, how do you get, to have folks on board, newcomers on board quickly and effectively as possible, so that you don't spend so much time, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, getting people understand organizational culture or policies. And then the other question was around, how do you provide, new and current staff with the right tools, the right approaches, to understand the humanitarian context as it were. And I understand, for many of you, this is a similar situation, especially working in different parts of Africa. You have issues of, reaching remote areas. You have issues of reaching, scale, having, a huge number of people get access to information. So what we did in this organization was to use a social learning approach. We used a software called Curator and hosted content. In this case, we ran a project management course, which helped us to, blend stuff around organizational policies, but at the same time, get stuff around what is the culture of this organization and blending it with project management. Running this, all this content, including videos, staff were able to, make videos about themselves, make videos making points about what they thought about project management, all the organizational policies, letting everyone, every other person know who they were, watching that in a video, it was really interesting, and it was pretty much a faster way of getting to know, for example, who was the HR, person, who was the finance person, even without, crossing all those boundaries. So what we did, worked very well. And just to share, like you can see over this on the slide here, what the content looked like when it was hosted, on this learning platform. People had chance to, introduce themselves, and there was stuff around also understanding the platform. One interesting thing, to note was that it gave people a flexible chance. People could do this learning using their mobile phones, and some actually did the entire, learning using their mobile phones. Others used their laptops or their computers, but using mobile phones to do this learning in a social way really made people to connect. So this is not like making learning so serious and scary. People, could do this, while even waiting in the car to pick up someone, or while taking a walk in the park, sitting down to check back into, the learning and see and make a video. It was really, really fun. So just a number of things that, came out as key outcomes, or I mean, just to make a point about measurement before I go to outcomes. People had a really good chance to, to say a lot, and at the back end, the organization could measure learning. We could see the level of engagement. If you notice on this slide, we could see the number of people who were viewing stuff, the number of people who made comments, people who made replies, and folks who added content to the course. So you could see, contributions from other people. And this was really important because as an organization, it made you know, what folks, or which folks rather, you could sell a new policy across with, and get use them to get buy-in of other staff. Looking at the comments or the views or the contributions of these people, of some staff who made more comments, it gave you a sense of, this folk will help, better share this policy across to other people in the different locations where, this organization was working. So let's just look at some of the key outcomes. There was a huge leap of confidence across staff. Not always do we have a chance to be in a training with maybe the HR coordinator, or with the director of finance, or with the country director. I mean, I don't know how many of you have had that experience already, maybe to be in a face-to-face training with a country director. I mean, especially in a difficult context where you don't even get to see your, leadership. This social learning process brought top leadership, and staff at the lower, level of the ladder, brought them together. I mean, in fact, we got the country director to do a welcome video for this course. And, top management people, were actively engaged in the course, replying, to the comments that other junior staff was making. This alone, made increase the confidence of many of the staff. I mean, and I could see that when I monitored the course in the feedback that the course, the participants gave. And a big outcome also was on the issue of skill here. So we're not talking about training, 20 people every year in a face-to-face training. This is about training over 150 staff in in a couple of weeks. So there's that issue of allowing for a very scalable learning experience. And there was also a huge learning transfer that was formal and informal. So people could learn from the content that was hosted on the course, but also people could learn from their peers. So by seeing the comments of other people on the course, people, were able to get stuff. And also there was that huge talent promotion. People were seeing what others were doing, and they were able to say, oh, I want to be like that person. I had people who, would write to me and say, I'm motivated by this person's experience, and I think maybe I'm considering joining the monitoring and evaluation team in my organization and all that. It was really an opportunity for people to talk and get to know each other in the organization, while at the same time, doing some kind of formal learning. So I'll just drop quickly some few things to consider, before doing something like this, before engaging in social learning. One of the key things to consider, this is something like lessons learned, would be to have a high organizational buy-in. So if top management keys into this kind of approach, then it really goes on well. The second thing is, because social learning, even though, as Faye said, is not new, it's still in a way like new when you write it somewhere. Let's go do a social learning course, or when you emphasize it. So it will be helpful to orient staff on the kind of approach. Take it easy with them. People are scared of, not everyone is, for example, comfortable with doing a video of themselves and saying something about themselves. So it's a gradual process, but if people, are taken through it, timely, they are able to really flow well. The last one will be, once you start learning in such a way that makes you hear from your staff, then there's no turning back. So I would say, once you start learning in a social way, then you have to be ready to listen a lot, and then open new areas in your organization for learning. Pretty much that's it. I hope this was helpful. Yeah.
Thank you, Tevea, for sharing this fascinating case study with us. And I'm sure people after the webinar will get in touch with you to hear a little bit more. So to summarize, the key benefits of social learning, as we've also just seen in the Nigeria case study, and there are many, but we just want to highlight the ones that tend to strike the biggest chords with organizations and people. So organizations that support social learning tend to have working environments that foster and promote conversations and dialogue. And obviously, in these changing times, that is a goal for most of us. We're able to enable learners to take responsibility for their own personal learning. So they are placed in the driver's seat, and not participants that are passively waiting for an organization to activate learning courses. And lastly, Teve, I think you mentioned it, it also empowers staff to think about learning in a new way by being able to share knowledge with their peers and gain knowledge from their peers. One of the questions we get asked a lot is, so what kind of tools and platforms and resources can you actually recommend? And I acknowledge that it can be overwhelming sometimes for people to navigate across all of the different options that are available, but also to understand what it is that you need or your organization might need. Now, we can't recommend anything as such, because of course it will depend on many factors, such as your context, your learning strategy, your budget and time. But what we can do is share a couple of tools and resources with you that we have come across ourselves, or that we have even used ourselves. So here are our top 4 picks. Now, the first one is a software called Panopto. And this is a video platform that allows you to easily manage and stream videos and share them across your organization. And it has that famous in-video search capacity, which I mentioned earlier. Now, they do offer a free 30-day trial, so you might want to have a look at them after this webinar. The second one is a platform called Degreed. And some of you might have come across Degreed already. But Degreed is a lifelong learning platform for individuals and organizations to discover learning content and build skills, but also to certify their expertise, which I know is very important to many of us in this webinar and to many of our organizations. Now, it's free if you are an individual, so you might want to sign up immediately after this webinar. Our third pick is Curator, and that was just introduced by Tever, and that's run by HT2 Labs and provides organizations with the tools to design and deliver social learning, but at the same time still being able to use their own content and systems that they already own, so it integrates quite well there. And our last pick is something called the Center for Learning and Performance Technologies, C4LPT. And they provide a very popular directory of learning and performance tools, and they cover over 1,000 tools. Some of them are free, some of them are paid, but it's really for every area of learning, including social tools, instructional tools, content development, etc. I would just like to see if we have any key trending questions at this point, in the chat box or in our poll. And I can see one of the questions that came in before was, how do we actually promote a culture of social learning in our organizations? Because that seems to sometimes be a bit of a challenge. And Teve and myself were having a conversation earlier today, and the issue really for us is twofold. One of them is being able to convincingly sell the benefits of social learning within your organization. And the other question is if you want to be able to take something to scale. So social learning is not about, you know, can 5 or 10 or 20 people be engaged? It's really on a large scale, how can I get my whole organization involved in something, or whole departments or cross departments? At the same time, anytime we're talking about a cultural change in an organization, it takes time. So many times we see people get very excited, it's a new social learning initiative going on, and after 2-3 weeks, you know, it kind of stops. So you do need to have that tenacity and be steadfast to keep going. And I know in the case of Nigeria, Tever, they were very fortunate because they had you as a steward to accompany the project from beginning to end. And of course, that's not something that all organizations always can do. But it's one of the key lessons that we have learned. If you want it to work, you really need to dedicate the time and the resources to it, and have somebody like a Tever in your team that can accompany it for 6 months, 8 months, 9 months, provide feedback. I'll just stop there for a second and see if there's any other questions coming up before we conclude on the webinar. All right. Nothing for the moment, and I am conscious of time. What we will do at the end is also have a look through the poll and the chat and respond to some of the most common and trending questions for all of you in the summary email. So for the moment, what I'd like to say is thank you very much for your time. And we will be running our next webinar in September. And now that each of you are on our mailing list, you will continue to be informed. And please feel free to share in your wider networks. In November, we will also be hosting a physical 2-day event in Nairobi, Kenya, that will be hosted by Thrive Worldwide and RaboWorks Africa. And the event will explore more around the theme 100% human workplace and the organization of the future. And again, more information will be shared with you as well. Lastly, if you're not already a member of our LinkedIn group called Learning and Development Africa, and you can see it at the top of your screen there, please feel free to join. It's a group where we exchange with peers and we want to keep the dialogue going. One very important caveat is that the LinkedIn group is not a marketing place to sell your CV or to launch your products. It's really set up for us to have exchanges and share information about upcoming events and updates across a wide range of peers and professionals. So thank you very much, both on behalf of Ravelworks Africa and Thrive Worldwide. We wish you have a wonderful rest of your day and a great weekend, and we look forward to connecting with you soon. Thank you.